The cold was a physical thing, a thick, abrasive layer that scraped across the exposed skin of Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Kowalski's face the moment the ramp of the CH-47 dropped. It wasn't the damp, biting European cold. This was high-altitude, dry, crystalline air that sought to freeze bone marrow within minutes. He stood rigidly at the perimeter of the landing zone, the wind kicking up razor dust and pulverized snow from the gravel runway of FOB Kilo 4. The base itself was an insult to the word fortress, a collection of hastily erected T-walls and repurposed shipping containers squatting miserably beneath the unforgiving peaks of the Hindu Kush analog. It reeked of diesel and the pervasive, sterile tang of high-grade military lubricant. The helicopter shuddered, whining its descent against the altitude. And then she descended. She was bundled in a high-end civilian-spec mountain parka, burgundy, a color utterly inappropriate for a war zone, and heavy waterproof boots. Her name was Clara. To the world, and certainly to the entirety of the 10th Mountain Division stationed here, Clara Kowalski was a kindergarten teacher currently taking a sabbatical, visiting her husband during his truncated mid-tour break. As she stepped onto the frozen earth, the roar of the Chinook momentarily overriding the base's ambient static, her eyes met his. They held the warmth he hadn't felt in 11 months. But beneath the relief, Marcus saw the immediate calculation in her gaze, a professional assessment of the inadequate perimeter, the thin distribution of personnel, and the general air of beleaguered exhaustion. "Welcome to paradise, darling," he murmured, pulling her into a quick, tight hug that bordered on necessity rather than affection. He smelled the faint, clean scent of her familiar perfume, a painful contrast to the sweat, cordite, and stale coffee that defined his existence. "It's colder than I imagined," she replied, her voice low, the words barely carrying over the rotor wash. She didn't sound fearful, merely factual. The subsequent hours were defined by the crushing weight of institutionalized arrogance. Marcus had arranged for a brief, guided tour, standard operational procedure for the spouse of a senior officer attempting to maintain morale. The problem was General Sterling. Sterling was the forward area commander, a man whose chest bulged with ribbons earned decades ago, and whose operational philosophy was rooted firmly in the belief that kinetic superiority was the only metric that mattered. He saw Clara as a distraction, an unnecessary liability, and, worst of all, a civilian trespasser in his domain. They were in the primary command and control, C2 bunker, the air stale and heavy with the heat generated by servers and radio equipment. Marcus, nervously adjusting the collar of his uniform, tried to introduce them properly. "General, this is my wife, Clara. Clara, this is General Sterling." Sterling offered a cursory nod, eyes fixed on a cluttered schematic of supply routes taped to the wall. He didn't even turn his head. "Mrs. Kowalski, keep clear of the high-traffic areas, please. We are operating at DEFCON 3 readiness." Clara smiled, a polite, disarming smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She noticed the radio operator nearest them, struggling to zero a handheld satellite radio, a critical piece of communications equipment. "Sir, excuse me," Clara interjected quietly, her voice possessing a surprising ability to cut through the humming static. "Is that a new frequency load for the RF 7800? The gain seems slightly mismatched with the antenna configuration. If you drop the frequency 15 kilohertz, you might stabilize the reception." Sterling finally turned, his face ruddy and scarred by years of poor sleep and high stress, contorted into a mask of pure condescension. He didn't just dismiss her, he aimed to crush her input. "With all due respect, Mrs. Kowalski," he drawled, the words heavy with contempt, "we have highly trained communications specialists handling the comms. Perhaps you should focus on enjoying the spectacular view of the mountains. This is a military operation, not a kindergarten classroom." The radio operator, a young corporal, flushed crimson and quickly averted his gaze. Marcus felt the familiar hot rush of anger and embarrassment. He knew that look in Clara's eyes, the quiet recognition of incompetence coupled with the refusal to engage in petty ego disputes. She simply nodded once, accepting the insult, and stepped back toward Marcus. As they walked away, Sterling's voice, amplified by the bunker acoustics, followed them. "Bloody civilians. Think a week watching CNN makes them experts." Marcus stopped, his hand tightening on Clara's arm. "I'm so sorry, Clara. He's been like this all week. The pressure." "I know the pressure, Marcus," she said softly, but the tone of her voice had shifted. It was flat, measured. "He's complacent. His T-walls are too close to the elevation on the ridge line. And the mortar positions are static. They've been observing us for days, and he hasn't moved the kill zone. We are entirely too visible. Marcus looked at his wife, the kindergarten teacher, whose operational assessment was frighteningly accurate. He wanted to ask her how she knew these things, how she understood the nuances of indirect fire deployment. But the moment passed. He looked down at his left hand, at the solid gold wedding band. He touched the slight imperfection near the inscription, a tiny, almost invisible scratch. It was the only tangible link to the truth he kept buried, the truth about how they had met and why she carried herself with that unsettling quiet authority. He ushered her into his cramped quarters, the space smelling faintly of boot polish and sweat-soaked wool. The isolation only intensified the building dread. The normalcy collapsed precisely at 0347 hours. It didn't begin with a warning, but with a concussive shockwave that slammed into the side of the containerized housing unit, rattling Marcus's teeth loose. The air immediately filled with the high-pitched shriek of the perimeter alarm, followed instantly by the deep, terrifying thump-thump-thump of incoming 82mm mortar rounds. "Incoming! Incoming!" The air crackled with panic. Marcus grabbed his plate carrier and helmet, his training instantly overriding the shock. "Stay here, Clara. Under the cot, stay low." He didn't wait for her reply, sprinting out of the hutch and into the blinding, freezing chaos. The attack was not a probing action. It was a full-scale assault designed to overwhelm and penetrate. The T-walls, which Sterling had foolishly positioned too close to the main structures, acted as perfect fragmentation shields for the attackers closing the final yards of the approach. Marcus reached the talk, which was now a scene of screaming desperation. The lights flickered violently, strobing against the dust and smoke that had already infiltrated the supposedly sealed environment. General Sterling was bellowing into the radio handset, his voice cracking with a fear he was trying desperately to mask with fury. "Get air support! Where is the damned QRF? I said QRF now!" The communications specialist, the young Corporal Clara had corrected, was covered in plaster dust, staring blankly at his monitor. "Sir, we lost the antenna array. The primary satellite link is down. We're running on HF backup, and it's intermittent." Marcus looked at the tactical display. The red icons, the enemy forces, were surging. They had breached the northern wire near the main vehicle depot. The SEAL team, supposedly the tip of the spear, had taken heavy casualties immediately. 2 of their snipers, positioned on Overlook Gamma, were down, their radio transmissions choked off mid-sentence. "General, the perimeter is collapsing in Sector Alpha," Marcus yelled, fighting to be heard over the continuous percussion of explosions. "They're using heavy machine guns from the ridgeline. They have superior elevation." Sterling slammed his fist onto the console. "Suppress them. Suppress them with what, Kowalski? Our 2 mortars are out of range for the ridgeline and the QRF is still 50 minutes out. We are isolated." Marcus knew then. This base was dying. Not just under fire, but under the weight of Sterling's catastrophic preparation. The enemy force was not attempting to capture the base. They were conducting a calculated destruction operation, targeting command and control, and then systematically eliminating personnel. The ridgeline was the key. From there, the enemy command element, likely a seasoned general himself, was coordinating the breach, picking off the high-value targets. Suddenly, a voice cut through the despairing din, calm, precise, and utterly devoid of fear. "Lieutenant Colonel, I need to see the elevation map for the ridgeline immediately." Marcus spun around. Clara stood in the doorway wearing his spare helmet, which looked comically large on her, and a discarded oil-stained flak jacket that barely contained her torso. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was observing the battle with the cold detachment of a mathematician reviewing a failed equation. "Clara, I told you." "The time for safety instructions is over, Marcus," she interrupted, her tone sharp, professional. She pointed toward the tactical display. "The forward observer team is positioned at 4,800 feet. The primary assault element is moving from the 3,500-foot contour line. They are funneling the attack through the northern draw. The command element is stationary, likely just below the summit, out of line of sight from the base's current HMG emplacements." Sterling, aghast, finally focused on her. "What in God's name are you talking about? Get out of my C2, woman. This is an active engagement zone." Clara ignored him completely. She looked directly at Marcus. "Where is your longest-range precision rifle? I need something capable of holding a stable trajectory at 2,500 meters, maybe more, given the wind velocity." Marcus stared at her, dumbfounded. The sheer audacity, the technical accuracy of her request. It was a language she should not speak. "We have two M110 SAS rifles. They're in the armory container, but they're zeroed for Sergeant Miller," Marcus stammered. "Miller is dead. Miller is down, Marcus. The position is being overrun." Sterling shrieked. Clara moved past them, her burgundy parka stark against the desert digital camouflage. She was already stripping off her excessive outer layers, revealing the surprisingly muscular definition beneath. "The M110 SAS is 7.622 51mm. It's stable. It'll work," she said, already heading toward the exit. "Marcus, unlock the armory. Now." His training screamed at him not to comply. Civilians, operational security, protocols. But his gut, the primal instinct that had kept him alive through 3 tours, told him this was the only move left. He looked at the tactical display again. The perimeter line was gone. The red icons were inside the wire. He pulled the heavy steel bolt on the secure armory door, his hand shaking. Inside, the room smelled strongly of solvent and gun oil. He located the designated rack. The M110 SAS, semi-automatic sniper system, was heavier than it looked, built for sustained, accurate fire. It was ugly, utilitarian, and dependable. Clara was inspecting the weapon before he even handed it to her. She checked the bore, flicked the safety, and then turned her attention to the optic, a Nightforce 5.5 22x50. "The BDC is set for 175 grain match ammo, right?" she asked, loading a 20-round magazine with swift, efficient movements. "Yes. Federal gold medal match," Marcus whispered. "Good." She racked the bolt, the sound echoing ominously in the confined space. "I need the Kestrel." Marcus knew what she meant. The Kestrel was a specialized handheld weather meter used to calculate ballistic solutions. He fumbled in a storage crate and handed her the device. She glanced at the readout. Temperature 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Barometric pressure 28.9 inches. Hg humidity 15%. "Wind velocity?" Marcus asked, his voice catching. Clara held the Kestrel aloft for a moment, letting the vane spin. "Gusting 15 knots, full value. Crosswind left to right. That changes the dynamic significantly at range." Sterling, who had followed them, his face purple with rage and disbelief, finally found his voice. "This is insane. You will not arm a civilian. I order you to stop, Kowalski. We are taking that position. We are mounting a counterattack." Clara stopped her final inspection of the rifle's suppressor. She looked over her shoulder at the general. Her eyes were no longer the warm, familiar eyes of his wife. They were the eyes of a predator who had just locked onto prey. "General, you are losing the battle because you are attempting to fight the symptoms of the attack, not the cause," she stated, her voice icy. "They are coordinating from the ridge. Eliminate the command node, and the ground assault loses cohesion. Your counterattack will be slaughtered before it reaches the gate." She slung the rifle across her chest, grabbed 2 spare magazines, and turned to Marcus. "I need to get outside the wire, on the slope above the communications array. It offers the best firing solution and the most concealment." "Clara, the outer perimeter is contested," Marcus pleaded. "The ground is open. You'll be exposed." "Exposure is calculated risk, Marcus." She paused, then gave him a final, piercing look. "Get me a cat tourniquet, 2 rolls of pressure bandage, and your radio earpiece. I need to hear the traffic." Marcus moved on instinct, retrieving the requested medical gear and the comms. He watched, helpless, as his wife, the woman who taught 7-year-olds how to read, cinched the tourniquet onto her own right thigh, just above the knee, a preemptive measure. "I'm going dark," she stated, clipping the radio earpiece to her collar. She stepped out of the armory, moving toward the edge of the C2, where the shelling seemed most intense. "If you move out there, you are deserting your post and aiding a civilian in a restricted area, Kowalski," Sterling roared, spittle flying. "You will be court-martialed. I will strip your rank." Marcus ignored him, staring at the point on the map where Clara was heading. He knew the terrain. It was a steep, icy incline, nearly 400 vertical feet above the base proper, exposed to the relentless wind and, crucially, visible to the enemy positions. "General," Marcus said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of absolute finality, "when the perimeter falls, your court-martial won't matter. I suggest you focus on managing the wounded." Clara was gone. Marcus watched the CCTV feed of the western edge, the view shaky and obscured by smoke. A flash of burgundy moved swiftly across the frame, hugging the ground, disappearing into the cover of a massive, snow-covered transformer bunker. The climb was brutal. Every step on the ice-crusted slope was a calculated risk of a slide that could send her tumbling into the kill zone below. The M110, heavy and cold against her back, shifted with every movement, forcing her to constantly adjust her center of gravity. The sound of the battle receded, replaced by the relentless howl of the wind, a high, mournful sound that tore at her exposed cheeks. She tasted the metallic dust kicked up by the incoming rounds. Clara reached the designated observation point, a precarious ledge shielded partially by 3 massive boulders. She lay prone, settling the rifle onto the bipod, the cold metal instantly leaching heat from her hands, even through the thin Nomex gloves she'd grabbed from Marcus's locker. She activated the Kestrel again. Range. She needed to find the target. She swept the scope slowly across the ridgeline, the high magnification cutting through the snowy haze. There, a cluster of 6 men, slightly separated from the main attacking force, was positioned around a low, dark structure, a repurposed shepherd's hut. One man was coordinating fire, holding a radio handset, pointing frequently down toward Kilo 4. Clara laced the position. 1,623 meters. The air rushed out of her lungs in a controlled, steady sigh. A 1,623-meter shot in a crosswind of 15 knots at this altitude, with a rifle she hadn't touched in years, using a round she hadn't personally loaded, was not merely difficult, it bordered on absurd. She began the calculations mentally, then verified with the Kestrel's output. Ballistic coefficient of the 175-grain match, 0.505. Altitude density, high. Drop at 1,623, approximately 17.5 mils, 59.6 MOA. Windage, 15 knots, full value crosswind. This required a massive hold. At 1,623 meters, the drift would be nearly 4 meters. She adjusted the elevation turret precisely, the clicks familiar and reassuring. She didn't have time to dial in the windage. She would have to use the mil dots on the horizontal stadia, holding far, far to the left of the target. She breathed in, then out. Her entire world narrowed to the small, illuminated crosshair. Target 1, the radio operator. He was the immediate threat, coordinating the indirect fire that was tearing Kilo 4 apart. She adjusted her position slightly, shrugging her shoulders to settle the rifle deeper into her collarbone. She had to compensate for the slight Coriolis drift, the rotation of the Earth pulling the bullet to the right, an effect usually negligible below 1,000 meters, but absolutely critical now. She settled the crosshair, not on the target but nearly 4 meters upwind, where the bullet was calculated to land. Her finger curled around the trigger, resting on the first stage. Squeeze, don't pull. She controlled her respiratory pause, the moment between heartbeats when the body is at its most stable. Crack. The muzzle flash was instantly suppressed, but the recoil hammered into her shoulder. She held the sight picture, tracking the vapor trail of the bullet, a tiny, invisible dart cutting through the vast distance. Time of flight, just over 2 seconds. Through the scope, the radio operator's head vanished instantly in a brief cloud of red mist and snow. He pitched backward, the radio handset still clutched in his hand. She didn't wait for the confirmation of death. Her training was absolute. Cycle the bolt, acquire the next target. The M110 functioned smoothly, ejecting the spent casing, feeding a fresh round into the chamber. The smell of burnt powder was sharp, acrid, a scent she had forgotten but now welcomed. In the talk, Marcus was glued to the shaky feed. He watched the enemy perimeter line suddenly waver, momentarily confused. Then he saw the impact. "Did you see that?" The corporal managing the video feed gasped. It was the FO, forward observer, just dropped. No sound of the rifle, sir. Marcus knew why. The M110, with its suppressor and the sheer distance, meant the sound would reach the base long after the bullet. Sterling, look. Marcus pointed frantically at the tactical overlay. The mortar fire had stopped. Clara was already lining up Target 2. Target 2, the field commander. The man in charge, clearly identified by the expensive Russian-made spotting scope he was holding. He was reacting to the sudden loss of the radio operator, turning to survey the distant FOB, trying to ascertain where the shot had come from. Clara recalculated. She had confirmed the wind and drop, but now she needed to adjust for the target's movement and the possibility of elevation change due to the commander dropping prone. She took the shot. Crack. 2 seconds later, the commander dropped without a sound, the expensive optic clattering onto the frozen rocks. The enemy cohesion evaporated instantly. The ground assault, the red icons flooding Kilo 4, stalled. Men began shouting, looking uphill, confused and leaderless. Marcus watched in horrified awe. The shots were impossibly precise, delivered with a speed and cold proficiency that Marcus had only ever read about in classified operational reports. He glanced at his left hand again, the wedding band, the scratch. He knew that scratch wasn't from moving furniture. It was made by the razor wire of a base in Tajikistan nearly 20 years ago, the base where they met, the base she saved. In the bunker, General Sterling's face was white. He was watching the tactical display in stunned silence, realizing that his imminent defeat had been averted by an unknown force. "Who the hell is shooting? Did the QRF arrive early?" Sterling demanded, searching for a rationale. "Sir, no. No Blue Force activity on the ridge," the corporal replied. It's coming from that elevated position near the transformer bank. That's outside the wire. On the mountainside, Clara was a machine. She eliminated the remaining threats methodically. The heavy machine gunner who was attempting to zero his weapon toward her, the medic who was attempting to tend to the commander, and finally the last remaining NCO attempting to organize a retreat. 5 kills, 5 shots, 5 lights out. Her breathing was deep, controlled, the condensation freezing instantly on the scope's ocular lens. She wiped it clear with a practiced swipe of her thumb, her focus unbroken. The silence that followed the last shot was profound. The wind still howled, but the relentless percussion of the battle below had subsided into scattered, disorganized, small arms fire. The enemy force, realizing their command structure was annihilated, was retreating, scrambling back into the northern draw. Clara stayed prone for 5 more minutes, scanning the ridgeline, ensuring the kill zone was clear and there were no stragglers. The cold was beginning to bite deep now, numbing the tips of her fingers. She pulled the rifle off the bipod, slung it, and began the careful, tactical descent, moving with the same efficiency she had shown climbing the slope. Not running, not celebrating, just executing the exfiltration protocol. When she stepped back inside the C2 bunker 10 minutes later, she was covered in snow and dust, her face streaked with grime, but her eyes were utterly calm. The bunker was silent. The only sound was the sporadic chatter of the radio and the low hiss of the air filtration unit. Every man in that room, from General Sterling to the lowest-ranking private, was staring at the woman in the burgundy parka, holding the M110 SAS like it was an extension of her own arm. She walked directly to Marcus, pulling the comms earpiece from her ear. "The threat is neutralized. The attack will lose cohesion and scatter," she stated, her voice returning to its normal, soft cadence, though strained by the cold. "They lost their primary command element and forward observation. They won't regroup for at least 48 hours. She carefully handed the M110 SAS back to Marcus, muzzle pointed safely toward the floor. "I need to check the wounded in the triage area," she concluded, walking toward the emergency exit, peeling off the heavy flak jacket. General Sterling stood motionless, his eyes wide, oscillating between the woman leaving and the clear tactical screen showing the rapid retreat of the enemy forces. "Wait," Sterling finally managed, his voice hoarse. He straightened his uniform, attempting to recover the authority she had stripped from him. "Who the hell are you? You just took out 5 high-value targets at extreme range. That's impossible with a standard-issue weapon in that crosswind. Who gave you authorization? What unit are you attached to?" Clara stopped at the doorway, her hand resting on the frame. She didn't turn around fully, just enough for the light to catch her face. "General," she said, her voice dropping to a level that forced every man to lean in to hear. "I am Clara Kowalski. I am the wife of Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski, and I am a civilian." She paused, then added a detail that cut Sterling deeper than any bullet. "And for the record, General, the windage on the final shot required a 3.8-meter hold-off, not accounting for the minute velocity spike from the downslope microburst. Your comms corporal was right. Your antennae array positioning was sloppy." She walked out, heading toward the makeshift aid station. Marcus stood there, holding the M110, the faint warmth of her presence still clinging to the cold steel. He knew the truth. He rushed toward the medic station. She was already working, her expertise now applied to treating trauma. She was calm, instructing the overwhelmed medic team on proper tourniquet application and triage priorities. Her kindergarten teacher patience somehow amplified into battlefield efficiency. When she had a moment alone, washing the grime from her hands in a sterile sink, Marcus approached her. "Clara," he whispered, 500 words, 5 kills. Who taught you that kind of precision? You haven't fired a weapon in 10 years. She kept her eyes focused on the water, watching the blood and dirt spiral down the drain. We met at the base in Tajikistan, Marcus, when you were recuperating from that mortar attack. Yes, but you were a trauma nurse, he insisted. You were there with Doctors Without Borders. She finally looked up, her expression tired, but resolute. I was running cover for extraction, Marcus, she confessed quietly. The Doctors Without Borders identity was necessary for field access. The sniper unit I ran used that compound as a temporary safe house. He felt the world tilt. He thought back to the scratch on his wedding ring. That day in Tajikistan, when the base was overrun, he remembered seeing a phantom figure on the high wall, delivering surgical, instantaneous death from impossible distances, saving his life and the lives of the few survivors. When he awoke later, he had asked who the guardian angel was. They told him it was just a civilian nurse who got lucky with a security guard's rifle. He reached up, touching the faint scratch on his ring. The scratch. When we got married, you insisted on putting that specific scratch on my ring. You said it was a reminder of where we started. It wasn't a reminder of the base, Marcus, she explained, her voice barely audible. It was my identifier, my call sign back then. That scratch pattern was how my command knew I had survived the ambush. What was your call sign? He asked, dreading the answer. She looked him straight in the eye. I was Ghost, she said simply. Before I was a kindergarten teacher, I was Ghost. They thought I died in Syria 8 years ago. I preferred they kept thinking that. Marcus slumped against the wall, absorbing the enormity of the lie and the brilliance of the tactical execution she had just performed. His wife was a legend, a ghost asset who had saved the life of every soldier in Kilo 4. The subsequent investigation was a farce conducted in freezing cold air, General Sterling refusing to admit his own operational failure, and terrified of revealing the presence of a mysterious, unidentifiable, and lethally effective force outside the wire, tried to bury the incident. The attack failed due to enemy operational error, Sterling dictated into the after-action report, carefully excluding any mention of the Ridgeline kills. We maintained perimeter integrity, and defensive fire neutralized the immediate threat. He called Marcus and Clara into his temporary patched-up office 2 days later, the air thick with tension and the smell of hastily applied sealant. Kowalski, Sterling began, leaning across his scarred metal desk. Your wife is a liability. Her unauthorized entry into a combat zone is punishable, and her interference with communications, while well-intentioned, was grossly unprofessional. He turned to Clara, his expression venomous. You are to be escorted off this base tomorrow morning. If I ever hear about your expertise again, I will personally ensure your husband faces the full weight of the UCMJ for failure to maintain operational security. Clara stood tall, unflinching. She was wearing her civilian parka again, the burgundy and audacious statement in the grim environment. General, she said, her voice steady, I understand the need for operational protocols, but protocols are built to support the mission. When the protocols fail and human lives are in immediate peril due to command negligence, the mission becomes preservation. Don't lecture me on command, Mrs. Kowalski, Sterling spat. You ignored the intelligence regarding the Ridgeline elevation. You dismissed a simple comms correction that would have allowed us to call for QRF sooner. You failed, General, Clara stated, her voice quiet but devastating. I did not. Marcus watched the confrontation, his career flashing before his eyes. He knew he should step in, save his rank, save his pension. But watching Clara, Ghost, standing there, delivering cold, hard truth to the general who had risked their lives, he realized he didn't care about the career anymore. She saved this base, General, Marcus interjected, stepping forward. We were 10 minutes from being overrun. Those 5 kills on the Ridgeline bought us the time to stabilize the perimeter. You want to charge me? Fine, do it. But if you try to minimize what she did, you disrespect every single life saved here. Sterling recoiled, his face trembling with suppressed fury. He had lost control of the narrative, and he knew it. He couldn't risk the official investigation discovering that a civilian accomplished what his elite team couldn't. You are both relieved of duty pending review, Sterling managed, forcing the words out. You leave tomorrow. Don't speak to anyone about this incident. As they were packed into the departing Chinook the next morning, the sun rising cold and bright over the brutal peaks, Marcus finally looked at his wife, the legendary Ghost, the kindergarten teacher, his center of gravity. Why didn't you ever tell me? He asked, the rotors drowning out most of the words. Clara leaned close, her breath warm against his ear. Because you were happy, Marcus. I earned my silence. I earned my peace. And sometimes, the most effective camouflage isn't the uniform. It's the life you choose to live outside of it. She reached out and squeezed his hand, her grip strong, confident. I just needed to make sure you had the chance to keep living yours. They flew out over the mountain ridges she had dominated, the fob shrinking below them, a tiny, defiant speck of civilization against the wilderness. Marcus realized that the man he thought he was, the disciplined, decorated officer, had just been taught the most important lesson of his career by the woman he loved. Rank was a title. Lethal competence was a necessity. If you believe respect is earned by blood and not by rank, type respect in the comments.